Hi everyone, welcome to the Mac Hack Workshop, which is our collaboration with MYOB. It's on DevOps and Pipelines Workshop. So I'm Katherine, I'm the events officer at Mac, and I'm joined with with Anna, who's also another events officer. We're just leading this event. Also, you can see other Mac members by our backgrounds. And today's speakers, we've got Bianca C and Anton, who will be going through some coding on our content, and Bianca K, so we've got two Biancas, she'll be going over more about the grad programs and things like that offered by MYOB. Just before we get started, a few things. If you want to ask questions during the event, we have a link. If you go to menti.com and enter the code, I think Anna's put it in the chat.
Yep, I just put that in the chat right now.
Yeah, so if you go there, you can ask questions and we'll be able to see them and answer them as we go or bring them up later when we have questions at the end. Also, it'd be really good if you could register your attendance. We'll post a link. It's just a Google form just to say that you've attended, because we still need to take attendance for our club, the club committee thing. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it from me. I'll pass on to Bianca K or BK, who will introduce the speakers and talk about MYOB.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katherine, and hi to everyone on the call. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really excited for Bianca and Anton to take you through a little bit more around pipelines and deployment, which was exciting. But I thought I would just kick off the conversation and talk to you all a little bit more about MYOB. For some of you, you might not know who we are. So I thought I'd give you a bit of a rundown and an overview on exactly what we do here at MYOB, and also our opportunities that we currently have that we're recruiting for right now. So some of you might know that we are an Australian and New Zealand business, and as you can see on our backgrounds here, our purpose is to help more Australian and New Zealand businesses start, survive and succeed. And one of those is making sure that those businesses survive right now is really important for us. And you may have seen some of the information that we've been distributing to all of our customer bases at the moment during this difficult time for them. But what we do is we through the provision of tax accounting and payroll and also ERP software, we provide a professional services to firms and small to medium businesses as well. So that's exactly what we do at MYOB. We're building this product to help small businesses, but there's also another sort of entry point there, which I talked about from that large enterprise perspective, as well as those who we partner with. So if you kind of think about who MYOB's customers are, yes, very much so, they are those small to medium businesses, but then we also definitely have those who are accountants and bookkeepers. And I always like to kind of put it into a bit of perspective of if you think about someone who's just starting off their business, and what that's going to look like for them. Most likely they're going to probably go to an accountant or a bookkeeper before finding a solution to do their pay and their accounting needs. So generally those accountants and bookkeepers, they're going to be in the know about the different products in the market that they can suggest to their clients. So it's really important for us to have a product that is supporting not only the small to medium enterprise groups, but also that the accountants and bookkeepers are really familiar with as well. But that's a little bit more about MYOB and what we do. We've been around since 1991, hashtag the original startup back in I believe it was a garage in the back of Blackburn. Since then it's grown. We are currently across we're across Australia and New Zealand, and we've got multiple offices. In Melbourne here itself, we've actually got 2 offices, one in Richmond, or in Cremorne, as most people say, and another one out in Glen Waverley, which is actually relocating to across the road. So we're all going to be in the one sort of tech hub space for each other too. But more importantly, the Future Makers Academy and the graduate opportunity for those who are looking for their first software development role coming out of university. So the Future Makers Academy is a program which is really bridging the gap from what you've learnt in your studies to actually learning on the job as well. So during the academy and the program, you go through multiple different phases and stages that really help excel your learning putting in place from what you've learned at university from theory into practice, and really mastering the craft of software development before you enter into a different phase, which is rotating through different teams. So the first phase is what we call acceleration, and you start at foundational, moving through to the frameworks and then onto CI/CD and deployment as well. So you go through that whole period, and you're supported by two mentors throughout that period. So you have two acceleration mentors, and they are really your go-to, and they guide you along that journey and support you and take you through multiple different complex challenges that are upskilling you in each area too. So I've got Bianca and Anton here today, and both of Bianca and Anton have been through the program and are now associate developers within our business. So I'm going to hand over to these two who are going to have a little bit of an introduction around what they're going to talk to you about today, and then we'll get into it. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks, BK. I'm just going to share my screen. Katherine, I think you have to allow me to do that. It seems as though it says you've disabled attendee screen sharing. Sorry guys, while we're working that one out. So a little bit about myself. I didn't go through university to get into software development. I have a degree in something completely different. I did economics and marketing, and have mostly worked in marketing. But then about 2 years ago, I did a 6-month boot camp. So through that boot camp, I then met some people and then got into the grad program for MYOB. And as BK said, I went through the program and am now an associate developer.
I'm Anton. I had, I guess, a bit more of a quote-unquote traditional experience. I actually went to Monash. I graduated last year, software engineering. Long 4 years, but clearly worth it if I'm here. So, you know, all's well that ends well. I am, as you can see, an associate DevOps engineer. You might be wondering what DevOps is, because it can be quite a vague, loaded term. I'm going to give my opinion on it. Do not be surprised if eventually you look up what DevOps is and someone else has another opinion. It's kind of a big catch-all term. But really, when you get down to it, DevOps is, I guess, a set of practices that sort of focus around the merging both development and operations. So it's stuff like creating pipelines and establishing continuous integration deployment, creating tools to allow developers to sort of really enhance their workflow around the whole deploy process, as well as maintaining the infrastructure that actually runs their code. It's a very high level thing. And again, I'm only an associate, I'm not an authority. So don't take me as this single source of truth.
Cool. Thanks, Anton. So here you can see there's a URL there, which will be the repo we'll use for the live demo we'll do through this talk. So if you would like to have a look at it now, jump on, but we will go through that and it will be available for you at the end to sort of have a go at it all yourself. And I believe it'll also be posted in the chat here. So the areas in which we are going to cover with you today are continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, and then a little pipeline demo for you. So we'll start off with continuous integration. So you'll often hear all these terms: continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous delivery. So I just want to run through with you what those differences are and what they sort of mean. So continuous integration is the process, is the practice you will take on with your team, which means you'll be merging to master daily. And reasons you want to do this is you might have come across it, you might not. If you haven't yet, you definitely will. Is a merging hell. I know that I am often scared of merging because you don't know what kind of complexities you're going to come across. So that's why continuous integration is really important. So we've got all us developers working here as a team, working in a code base. Continuous integration is the point at which you're able to merge and you will run your build and your test. if you don't know what that means just yet, don't fret. We are going to go through that. I'm just going to go through continuous integration and what that is first. So it just gets you to the point in which your application and your software is built and tested. It is the bit before you go into a test environment and a prod environment. Just to cover those a little bit, essentially you have your test environment, which should replicate as close as possible to your production environment. And the reason you would sort of separate them out would be because you want to be able to mess around in your test environment. You don't want to mess around in your prod environment. People will have different opinions. I hear people testing in prod and it makes me twitch a little bit, but that's why you have your test environment. So you can play around with your software as it works. And then if you're confident that your software works as it should in your test environment, that should give you complete confidence that your software will work as it should in your production environment. So we want to use continuous integration, like I said, to avoid that merging hell. And you want to, in order to do that, you also need a solid amount of tests within your software. Those tests will allow you to easily find bugs. So if you're constantly merging into master and those tests, say a test fail, if you have enough tests in there, you should be able to find that bug within 10 to 20 minutes. If you're integrating at the end of the week with everyone, there's probably got to be more than just one bug in there, and it makes it a lot more difficult to find. So that's really why you want to use integration. So you have less bugs at one time, and you can sort of focus more on the building. So continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is now an extension on continuous integration. You need to practice continuous integration in order to do continuous delivery. So we have our developers here, and merging to master then takes you all the way to through build and test, and then through to your test environment. The purpose of continuous delivery is so you are always ready to rapidly deliver your software. So you've got those changes going into this test environment, you're then testing. You can then make sure that at the point in which you want your software to go into production, it's ready to go. So yeah, continuous delivery is a point up into your test environment. And that switch there it's sort of like a business decision. If you're confident enough that everything works in your test environment, that's when you should say, like, how big is this change? Do I want this change to be out into production just yet? And so you would make that decision, whether it be in your team or dependent on how your software works. So for example, one of the applications that my team works on, we have a consumer who we have a very strong contract with. So any changes can mean that their software might break. So we use continuous delivery so that we can make our changes and do everything we need to do, but then only when we know we can integrate well with them will we flip that switch and go into production, so that both softwares will continuously work. And yeah, so that is continuous delivery. And next we have continuous deployment. So continuous deployment is, again, you have to be practicing continuous integration to do. But then when you are doing that integration, it will take your software all the way out to the production environment. Now, the way to be able to practice continuous deployment is your tests need to be able to be 100% automated. Because you're essentially relying on those tests to make sure that as soon as your software gets out to production, that it's working exactly as it should. And those tests will catch any bugs that your code might have. So yeah, continuous deployment relies on a lot of trust in your fellow teammates who are working on the code, but the biggest trust is in your tests. So one reason why for example, that we can't do this for the software I was talking about that had continuous delivery is because we're using really old softwares that we're pulling data from, and we're unable to automate that testing. So we have to do a few manual tests. So we can't use continuous deployment for that process. But if we would love to be able to automate everything and just be able to flick the switch or just commit into master and it go all the way to your production environment in one go. And in order to do continuous deployment well, not only do you need that strong faith in your tests, you also need a good rollback system and strategy. The reason for this is, although you may think you've covered all grounds in your testing and you've tested everything you could, the chances are there's probably going to be something missed, and you won't always find those bugs straight away. Something might happen 2 weeks from now, someone's using your software in a different way, and you've then realized there's a bug. You need a rollback system in order to go back to 2 weeks prior when you knew your code was working as it should, and to be able to quickly change back into that. So that's why you use things like version control in GitHub and things like that. So you've got those versioning and you're able to go back to a point where you knew you had a working software. So there's many benefits in using these different practices, which I've touched on a little bit. But to kind of bring them all back together, the number one benefit of doing this is lowering risks. If you're committing to master daily, you're finding those bugs really quickly. Like I said, it should only take you about 10-20 minutes to locate those bugs. You're lowering those risks of huge changes need to be made, or say if you were to release every 2 weeks and you just do that just before, you're probably not going to release when you think you can, because there's so many uncertainties of where those bugs may be. So if you're doing it more often, you're lowering the risk of struggling to find those bugs. Progress. If you're aiming to merge to master daily and always integrating with everyone else who is working on your software, you kind of end up breaking your work down into really small chunks, and it gives you more of a sense of progress. And as well, some of you may have, some of you haven't, but when you're breaking down how to build something, you may think you've got it all covered, but then you go and build it and you start realizing a bunch of things are missing, or something should work a little bit differently, and different things like that. So if you're constantly breaking down the work into these little chunks, you'll get much more of a sense of progress, rather than it being, like I said, right at the end and then you're being like, oh, this is not working how we expected. So yeah, giving you that sense of more progress. And the last one is a constant feedback loop. This one sort of ties everything in together by getting that feedback really often, so daily, from your build and your test pipeline. You're constantly getting feedback, making sure that your software is working as it should. So not only in the point of continuous integration, but for the point of continuous delivery, you're then able to test it in the test environment and making sure that it is working as you hoped. As I say, in an environment that replicates your production environment. And then for continuous integration, you're getting that feedback loop from users. You might use different ways of doing that, but you're getting that feedback from them, making sure much more often to make sure that your software is working as it should. So bringing it all together, these are 3 different practices. There'll be many reasons why you may use continuous delivery over continuous deployment. Like I said, continuous deployment relies on a lot of trust on your tests and your teammates. But either one you may use, you definitely want to be using continuous integration. Avoiding that merge hell. Merges still scare me, and I hope one day it doesn't, but the more often you do it, the less scary it gets, and the less bugs, the less time it'll take you to find those bugs. So yeah, now I'll hand it over to Anton to do a little pipeline demo.
Neat. Let's share my screen. Sorry, I'm new to Zoom. I feel like a I feel
There we
like
go.
I'm
You can
an
see
old
it.
man. All right. So, hey, if you've been able to see the repo so far, you might have already sort of looked around, but really what this is, it's a very small sample repo. It solves a problem called the payslip calculator. At MYOB, as it says, we rock with payroll, and the most important part of payroll is getting your payslip because that's when the money comes in. And it's a very simple problem that we sort of have at MYOB. It's a good way to sort of test your skills a little bit. But as you can see already, as part of the repo, I've got this little build parsing thing here. So we're going to click it, and it brings us to a site, Travis CI. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at a lot of open source stuff, but generally you'll see some type of build parsing. And what that means, it has some type of CI/CD sort of build pipeline stuff. So as you can see here already, I've got on my master branch, the most recent commit has passed. You can see you can see some things going on. There's like a build, test, deploy, but like, what is that really, like, how does this all work, and how do you get it to work, and what does this all kind of mean? So let's open up the repo, and I'll hopefully be able to explain myself. Cool. So this is our handy repo. And we've also got, as part of the repo, this Travis.yml thing. So YAML is a relatively popular markup language that you'll see a lot when you're doing some DevOps related things. It's pretty widely used, so although it can be a little confronting at first, you'll start to sort of, get used to it, and it's much better than something like XML. So anything that doesn't make me do XML makes me a happy man. So as part of this, we can sort of start to break down a little bit what's going on in this sort of in this pipeline. At the start, I've specified that I've got using the language Python because it's easy to write in. I've also specified the Python version, and then I can start to see here that I've got sort of each individual I've got this thing called a jobs, and then inside of it has sort of different stages called build, test, deploy. Build, test, deploy are the sort of three most common stages of a repo, of a pipeline rather. More often than not, those are considered sort of the minimum viable thing, because you need to make sure that you can build, test, and deploy. And we'll sort of start to break down a little bit what these individual steps mean. So the first step we have here is build. As if you want, you can follow along in the Git repo, and you can sort of see in better. I've left some notes in these scripts themselves to sort of explain some stuff I might not get around time to explain. But the idea is that for each of these steps, we're pointing towards this script, and if I had something to build, or if I was to build something, it would sort of run this script, and it would execute and run the build step like that. So it's just a simple bash script. In general, and sort of at MYOB, a default is we use Docker to build our images, and then we sort of push them up to a Docker hub. Please do not install an update. We sort of we create a Docker image and we push it back up. And that's sort of like our build step. But admittedly, if you're running something that's all going to be like on the one step, you probably don't need to necessarily build, but the idea is fail fast. So if you can't compile your code, don't bother continuing on to the sort of next couple of steps. Speaking of the next couple of steps, let's look at our test step. So if we look again, it's under this sort of ops bin test. This is a whole aside. I encourage you to read it in your own time. Otherwise, a bit of a waste of time for me, and that's unfortunate. But the idea is that this thing here runs our unit tests. So if we actually look at the repo itself, we can see that I've got a couple of different Python classes here, and I've also got a tests folder here with some tests. If you're not too familiar with testing in general, it'll take some time to learn. It won't take too much time to learn. I guess it's just a very unfamiliar concept. But the idea is we just have each of these test classes will have the test that we want to run. If I was using a full-featured IDE like PyCharm, I used it a lot in university. It was very nice to just sort of click a play button and then it would work. but unfortunately, we don't have that, so we need to run things via the command line. So we have this fancy little one-liner here that will run all the tests. And if I actually want to sort of run it myself, I can run that command, or if I want to just make sure that I'm following the exact same steps that the CI/CD sort of pipeline will be using, I can actually just run it myself. It's already there. So we can see here, this is the important part, all the tests have been run. And so now I know that when I do push this up to into the pipeline, I actually know that there's going to be 3 tests that are run, and we can sort of, theoretically have 3 tests here, so it all checks out. The final step is the most interesting, well, can be one of the most interesting steps, and it's the deploy step. When you write code, generally it needs to go somewhere, especially if you're writing it for other people to use. So if you're writing, for example, a web app, you need to publish it onto whatever service you really want to use. Because this is a simple Python script, and because I kind of wanted to make it easy for you guys to take it down and sort of experiment a little bit with what's going on, I don't actually deploy, but there are services like Heroku and stuff that do work. And again, we can sort of see that I've got something here going on. So if I actually want to deploy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bin. Cool. And it pretends like it's deploying because I put a sleep in. Isn't it fancy? Cool. So at a very high level, this is the definition of what the individual steps are. And then we make a change and then it sort of runs. And that can be like kind of simple to understand, but maybe not necessarily simple to, it can be hard to grasp the worth of why this is important. Because you can just run your tests on your own machine, right? We want to try and eliminate the idea of works on my machine because it can be a very, it's not conducive to good development if everything just works on your screen but doesn't work on anyone on your own machine, but doesn't work on anyone else's. So we want to make sure that your tests can run in a sort of neutral, unbiased point, which is this agent or pretty much a machine in the cloud that runs your code. And you also want to have the faith that whatever changes you do make, if something does fail, if there's a test that goes wrong, the build stops and you can't deploy anything. So let's just do a quick example of what that might be. Please, VS Code, stop. So cool. So we're just going to do a quick test fail. We can do self.assert true, and we're going to do false. And if I don't need to do semicolons, it's Python. So if I know what I'm doing, and hopefully I do, what we can do is we can, cool. We can push this. So we're going to say test fail.
Hey, Anton, sorry to interrupt, but we have a question.
Absolutely.
Is YAML the same as YML?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a fun one. Yeah. YAML and .yaml and .yml are both the same file type, but for some reason you can just choose one way or the other. I don't know why, and it's very confusing and frustrating. Certain languages might make you do one way or the other, but I haven't really had to deal with it. That's a good question. I had that same question when I first found it, and because it's all just very confusing. You kind of take for granted once you learn. Hey, so we've already got a build that's going on here. That's handy. So we can see here the build step passed. That's great because nothing's happening. And then we're starting to see here, we can see our sort of steps here, and we can see the test is running right now. As a brief aside, how does this actually sort of work? So we got the idea that I pushed from my computer into Git, and then what happens is Git has a webhook that sort of will notify Travis.ci of the fact that it's a master, something has been pushed to master, and it will let it know, hey, you need to start building, so you can sort of, figure out if it's working. And unfortunately, we can see, well, unfortunately in this case, we can see that a test has failed. So we actually can click on the step, and we can see in the agent itself or in the job, we can see that it has we can see what it's done. So we can sort of go through, and it's cloned my Git. It's checking that it's got Python, all that type of stuff. It runs the script at this point, and then we can see here that it has the F there, and it's exactly what we expect it to be. And now if we actually check on, yes.
Oh, sorry to interrupt again.
It's all good.
We have another question that's asking, what does my MYOB use for CI/CD?
That's a good question. So we actually use a service called BuildKite. It is geared towards an industry level, sort of a company-wide type of initiative to try and get it yourself. It's very expensive, unfortunately. My team actually, until very recently, we was using Travis CI for one of our open source projects. And but in general, we'll use BuildKite, which will actually use as a very similar sort of YAML structure and stuff like that. Cool. So if we actually refresh onto this page here, it says it's passing. It's lying. I don't know why it would make me look embarrassed like this, because if we click it, it should show that the build says passing there. Not 100% sure. We can see that's failing. Travis CI, great tool. But we can see, yeah, that it has in fact failed, and we can sort of see that there is the most recent thing. And so now we realize, oh, I've got a test that's failing. I better make that pass. Neat. The joy of pushing to master directly. If you're doing it correctly or politely, you'd create a branch, then sort of push it to master, but you know, why not? So we have this thing here. It takes a little bit to sort of pick up the code. Travis CI is a free tool to use, which means we're going to be competing with other people for resources, but it is widely used. There are a lot of different open source projects that use it. There are alternatives like Circle CI, or if you want to run your own server, Jenkins. And at like an industry level, there are other tools that Travis has a private version, and there's also BuildKite like we use at MYOB. So the joy of waiting for your tests. So yeah, as we can sort of see here, we can see that's passed like we said before, and it runs a script and everything like that. So it's actually really good to be able to check your builds and what's going on there, because if you want to know where something went wrong, the quickest place you're going to go is towards these steps, and you want to try and just drill down as quickly as possible. And that's also why we have steps in our pipeline. It's to try and break through sort of the different responsibilities. We can, if we wanted to, put this in all one big script and then run it all in one big go, but it wouldn't be very helpful, because once something breaks, we won't actually be able to figure out where it goes from. And it's going to do a fake deploy. I don't know why it takes like 18 seconds to run a small, because I've got a sleep loop in there. Way to go, me. But yeah, that's sort of at a very sort of high level, a very simple CI/CD sort of pathway. I will say you guys can clone this repo and you can sort of experiment. You have to create your own pipeline and stuff. It's very, very easy to do. And I would recommend you also try doing the coding example, whether you do it yourself or you build upon what I've got. I've actually got a cheeky bug that's in there if you want to try and expand on the work, so you can see if you want to write a test, if you can figure out where it fails and stuff. But yeah, that's at a sort of very, very high level how that all goes. I would show you a production pipeline, but I think under like company rules, I'm not allowed to. So I don't want to lose my job while my former manager BK is in the call, so I'll leave it be.
And just quickly to tie this back to continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. So if you were doing continuous delivery, there would be a little pause between the test and deploy steps. and you would essentially have a release button there to say, yep, when we want this to be released to production, we'll press that, and then your deploy script will run. And yeah, continuous deployment will be when all 3 scripts will run straight through.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, Bianca. There's another question that's asking, what are the steps in your pipeline at MYOB?
That's a really good question, actually. It kind of depends from what pipeline you're using, because each individual project is going to have their own separate thing. My team runs what we call a Kubernetes cluster, and so that involves having a lot of infrastructure that we have to deploy and stuff. So if you look at our pipelines, what you'll see is it has it deploys to it will like run the check, build an Amazon image to then deploy onto these different instances. It has to spin up thoroughly, put it to the first test cluster that we have going on, and then we have to manually say put it to pre-prod or sit or whatever you want to call it. It's the prod-like environment. We push it into pre-prod, and then after that we have to push it in. It's manual steps at each time. I'm trying to see if there's one that I can actually show without getting in trouble.
Ours is kind of special. So my team work in migrations. So there's a lot of different softwares that MYOB has acquired over the years, and back then people would use them on their desktops. So we have a lot of old desktop software which we need to extract data from and push it into online services. So with ours, we actually have built our own build kite agents. As Anton mentioned, an agent is essentially just a machine up in the cloud. And the reason we had to build our own for our pipeline to use is because we had to install all the legacy software onto those agents, the machines, so that when our test runs, they are able to use those legacy software. So yeah, we had to do that setup before writing our pipelines, and then yeah, it'll run our tests and deploy through there.
Yeah, thank you. We also have another question that has come in asking, how long does it take to go through all these steps and deploy code?
Good question. So your aim is obviously to make it as short as possible, because like I said, with that feedback loop, you don't want to be waiting forever to be like, oh, does all our code work? Are all the tests going to pass? And because you can find that your test will pass on your computer, but may not pass in the build and test script. And like we said, that's because of that whole works on my machine problem that can come up. So you don't want to be waiting too long. My team's build takes around 8 minutes for the service we currently run. But yeah, you essentially want your tests to run as quick as possible, so you're able to get that feedback loop a lot quicker. You do hear horrible stories out there of people's builds running for about an hour, and sometimes that's not avoidable depending on what tests need to be run, but you do essentially want it to be as short as possible.
Yeah, and just to sort of one of our pipelines do run for an hour. Well, but it's not necessarily just test. It's part of it is spinning up infrastructure, and it's not necessarily on our behalf that we're waiting. It's waiting on Amazon to really start provisioning these EC2 instances, stuff like that. There are as you enter the industry, you will come across legacy code bases that have horror stories of pipelines that go for many hours, more than just one, less than 24. So that's positive, but it happens generally when you have a more a code base that's sort of tied down with legacy stuff. But generally, as we've sort of gone through and as the industry has started to evolve, you'll come across like newer code bases that are a little bit easier. If you're actually interested in sort of seeing maybe the average runtime of some stuff, because a lot of these open source projects have a code base, have like a code base or CI/CD associated with them. Like I'm sure you can go to React's GitHub page and then just click on their build pipeline and see how long it takes. So again, it very, like Bianca said, it varies. But you know, ideally, probably at the university project level, 5-10 minutes. At a big product level, an hour probably isn't the best, but it's not the worst.
Just to touch on something there quickly, Anton mentioned EC2 instances. Just in case you don't know what that is, it is AWS's version of the machine in the cloud.
Just conscious of time, BK, did you want to talk about the Futures Makers program before you had to log off for your next?
Yes, I gave a bit of a recap at the start, but if anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask, and I'm not sure if there are any coming through around the Future Makers Academy.
So, I don't know if you want to go over again. We've just had people joining throughout, so I'm not sure, maybe they weren't here at the start.
Sure, no worries. Okay, awesome. So I just spoke about briefly before around our graduate program at MYOB. It's called the Future Makers Academy, and it's for those wanting to enter into software development to start their career. So when you enter into the program, there are two parts, one called acceleration and the other part called rotations. So the first part is really bridging the gap between your studies, what you've learned at university or like in boot camps, and really putting that theory into practical practice and practicing through it. You're supported by two mentors. So we have two mentors as part of the program for each protege coming in, and they take them on a guided learning journey. Something I didn't touch on earlier actually, and I should touch on it now, but I think some people have a question always of, you know, how long is your graduate program and how long do these different phases go for? And I think the real sort of point of difference that we have with our program here at MYOB is that because it is about you and your journey and it's very personalised, there is no set structure and time frame around how long you need to be in each phase. You're supported by two mentors, as I mentioned, so they take you on your journey, and some people take 3, 4, 5, 6 months in an acceleration phase. Some people can take longer, and no matter which sort of stage you're at, either or is absolutely fine. We don't want you to be learning at a pace that you're not comfortable with, so it's about understanding what your learning style is, and for us to be able to support you with that. Once you go through acceleration as well, you're given a series of complex problems to help upskill you in different areas. So you go from language design through to CI/CD and deployment as well. So there's different sort of areas that we focus on in the program. You also work on a cohort project, which helps sort of with the team work aspect skills. So there's a lot of different soft skills that we do focus on. Something that we know is really, really important is feedback, how to receive and give feedback as part of your growth, and especially as a software developer. So there's different other sort of soft skills that we'll touch on throughout your time in the program as well. The second phase we call rotations, and that's when you get the opportunity to go into different teams and actually start working on the product and becoming a team member as well. So those rotations usually go anywhere between 3 and 6 months. And again, it's very varied depending on the skills that you want to learn within that rotation. But we sort of say 3 as a minimum and then 6 as a maximum. And 3 as a minimum to make sure that you're gaining as much experience and knowledge and learning as many skills as you can. But sort of capping it at that 6, as well. Otherwise we know that those teams will want to keep you as an associate developer, and you're probably at that level as well. So the whole purpose of the program as well is for you to really understand what you want to learn, and for us to support you with those different rotations to gain that knowledge. So some people will do 1 to 2 rotations, some people do 3 or 4 rotations. There's no set hard rule. But as a general rule, you'll probably see people moving into the program between 12 and 18 months. One thing that I found that coming into our program at MYOB as a protege and moving into an associate role is that we find that you'll move into a developer role within your first 12 months of your role as an associate. And the reason for that is because we've really helped support you and taught you those skills from the beginning. And we know that we will be able to upskill you further and support you with your career development moving forward too. So that's a little bit of I guess, an overview of the program and sort of what it looks like. Both Bianca and Anton have been through the Future Makers Academy. Applications are currently open at the moment, and they'll be open until this Sunday. And after that, we'll start reviewing applications, and then we'll move people through the process too.
Yeah, we did have a question that came in just now asking about, are there any, or how long, what is the application process timeline like for MYOB?
Yep. So we opened our applications probably about 4 weeks ago, and it does close this Sunday. So it's actually been open for quite some time. So if anyone did apply for the program at the very, very beginning, you might not have heard anything, and you would have received a notification to let you know that your application went through and that we would get back to you. And then those who are moving through the process, you'll either be notified that you haven't been successful, or you'll be notified that you have been going through to the next stage of the online application, which is a component of verbal and written communication. Should you then proceed to the further parts, you'll be notified. At the moment, because applications are open until this Sunday, we haven't started doing any of those reviews as of yet. So just be patient. We've had a lot of applications so far, over 700 to be honest with you all. So for us, it's going through a lot of them and making sure that we're putting the time to review every single person's application. We hope to be able to make offers before the end of June. So that's sort of our timeline. Many of you who have been looking at different graduate programs and recruitment processes, you'll know that those processes can take up to 3 months, but we hope that we can sort of wrap it up before the end of June.
Yeah, and there's another quick question that's come up. Are there any internship opportunities while completing an undergrad degree? So I'm assuming non-graduate programs.
Yeah, so the Future Makers Academy is actually quite it's still actually quite new. It's only been around for about 3 years now. We have had an internship program running over in Auckland for a few years, and the goal would be to eventually be able to have an internship program over the summer period for our different locations too. We're just not at that stage yet. We're not sort of at that level yet. So at the moment, we don't run any specific internship programs, no.
Is it okay if I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
Go
sure.
for it.
I was wondering if your program allows applications from international students. I only ask because a few days ago I actually applied to a program and I sort of got automatically rejected. So I just wanted to check if that was like a requirement to be a native.
So the requirements around visas, it's a tricky one because it's not a hard no for all visas. It's very dependent on the visa that you're on.
I see.
So this program is going to be starting in February 2021, which means you need to have working rights for 2 years from there. And you need to have those working rights when you've actually applied for the program. So I hope that clears that up for you.
Yep, that's no problem. Thank you very much.
No worries.
If there's no more questions about the program, we had some questions about like DevOps again and pipelines.
Awesome. Just before you ask those questions, I've actually got to jump off to another event, everyone. So I just wanted to quickly say thank you so much for everyone for coming and to listening to both Bianca and Anton talk around DevOps and pipelines. And thank you, Bianca and Anton, for presenting as well to the MAC team.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one of the questions was, what's the difference between DevOps and Agile?
So
Do you want to go for it or should I?
go for it, Anton.
All right. So I've been through the uni subjects that teach you Agile, so I can probably give a bit of a uni experience on this. One, I just want to say, not as useless as you'd think, surprisingly. So, you know, if you ever had to take any software eng subject done by David Squire, you at least haven't wasted your time. DevOps is mostly focused on the idea of like more of the technical aspect of like sort of creating build pipelines and sort of enabling teams to move faster within an agile experience. That's a lot of buzzwords, but really what it comes down to is the idea that the DevOps side of things is enabling teams to move quick and be confident with whatever steps they're taking, so they don't really have to worry too much about, stuff like infrastructure or, if they're doing the right thing. Agile is more of a it's not a methodology, it's a philosophy. And so agile is more about the idea of short iterations and sort of, quick talking to your customers and stuff like that. So I guess at a high level, there's the idea of DevOps that allows you, DevOps or the pipeline, stuff like that you'd build within the DevOps space, being, the pipeline we showed you, allows you to move quickly, break things like the old Facebook motto, and it allows teams to work in an agile way because their feedback cycle that they can then present to their customers and stuff like that is drastically different compared to having no build pipeline and then sort of being like, well, everything's manual and it's slow to make changes. Agile is more of a way of working. It has different forms that it takes, stuff like Scrum or Kanban and stuff like that. And that's more to do with like sort of the workflow that you go through. So stuff like you doing stand-ups, retros, blah, blah, blah is like another aspect of Agile, but isn't necessarily the definition of it.
Great. Yeah, you also find Agile is being applied not just in IT spaces now, so it's kind of getting popular. Another question was, as a student, how can we learn more about DevOps and continuous integration and development?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you like what I've shown today is something that you can do right now, like picking up a build pipeline, reading through some documentation. It's relatively straightforward. I guess the idea, it's like very much the mountain to climb is the dealing with, it's to sort of get over that initial, like, what is this? What is going on? I don't understand anything phase, which still hits me every day. But you kind of just have to smile and keep trying. So if you're looking as a student to sort of get into this type of stuff, I would strongly recommend just creating a little small sample repo and just trying to learn different practices. AWS documentation, which is at also AWS in general can be free for a certain amount of usage, which you'll never hit. The AWS documentation is a Bible. It is more than it is thick, it is deep, it has got all these different ideas of like certain concepts and explaining how those all different all they work. So you can sort of read an intro to AWS by just looking through documentation. There are certain online courses. I think A Cloud Guru on Udemy is a good example of something that will have these sort of resources available to you. And Udemy courses are always on sale, so you can cop like 120 hours for $5 and you'll listen to 3 before you give up. But the 3 hours is better than anything you'll sort of get, candidly speaking, probably better than you'd get in most of your uni subjects. I did one uni subject that had testing. I forget who was run by, but I think it's now cancelled. So, you take what you can get, really. Bianca, do you have any thoughts?
No, I would agree with that. AWS is a good place to start. Starting off with EC2 instances would be the first area I'd look into. And yeah, I think Travis CI is a really good way of you being able to see those different steps. And yeah, good luck.
I think that's the end of our scheduled event. I don't know if you had anything else to add as final comments or anything.
If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer it.
There was one other question. Maybe it means more to you than me. It says, do you guys have any code coverage implemented in your builds?
Code coverage is a conscientious subject. Bianca, you look as reluctant as I do to talk about this.
Yeah. So yeah, code coverage is very much you'll find multiple different opinions. I don't like to look at good testing dependent on how much code coverage you have. I like to look at testing in, have you tested all your business rules? So, and in terms of business rules, it's all those little things that make your software work as it should. For example, if I'm going to build a software with tic-tac-toe, a business rule is someone wins when they are all in a row. Someone wins when they're all in a diagonal. Someone wins when they're all in a column. They're sort of different business rules. So I would like to see my testing as, have I covered all my scenarios? Have I covered all my edge cases for how my software is meant to work? I think if you just go by test coverage, you probably end up, you may end up testing unnecessary things, or yeah, it just, and it doesn't really tell you that what you're testing is worth testing. But on the flip side, if your code coverage is low and you've tested all your business rules, that may tell you that you've got some unnecessary code in your design.
Yeah, I think code coverage is a huge scam. A little hard on that, but I don't think it should be a metric you look at that you then put into your pipeline. I think it should be something that you keep in mind when you remember it's there. But personally, I don't think any of the code bases I've worked in have had code coverage as part of the pipeline. And also, like my current boss told me a story like last week about how he worked in a code base that had fantastic code coverage, but the code was constantly crashing and was completely buggy. Like although the tests passed and like all the coverage was solid, it didn't necessarily mean that it was a good project. And like Bianca said, on the flip side, he's worked in ones that have had like no code coverage, and it's also bad. So really, yeah, think about the quality of your tests more than anything else.
Awesome. I think I'm just going to double check, but I'm pretty sure that was all the questions. So I guess I'd say thank you so much for presenting and all of that gone through and answering all our questions. After the event, I'll post all the links again in the Facebook page so everyone can access that.
I'm happy for you to share Anton and I's email addresses as well. If anyone has any particular questions that come by later and feel like contacting us, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We can't get you jobs. I'm just going to put that out there right now. We can't get you a job, but you know, we're happy to have a chat.
Yeah, for sure. If you need some advice on something, I think one thing I would say with finding your first job in the industry is it's not necessarily about your coding abilities. They know you're a junior, and one thing especially I can only speak coming out of a boot camp. Anton was out of a university degree, but the main thing you're missing is like understanding those best practices, and that is what they really appreciate in a role. So they know you're not going to have those coming in as a junior. So the main thing to focus on is your attitude, your willingness to learn, your willingness to work in a team. Those sorts of things are really important for your first role.
Great. If you have any other questions, we have another event also coming up where Bianca K from MYOB, who just spoke earlier, will also be on the panel. So you can have another opportunity to ask any questions you had there. And that's on Tuesday. You can just see in our Facebook events. But I think that's pretty much it from us. We also have an event starting now, Mac Collab, where they're learning about HTML and CSS. So you can join that as well. But I think that wraps up this workshop. Thank you so much again, Anton and Bianca, for going through that. Where should they find your email addresses if they wanted to contact? I can post them.
I can post them now on the chat.
Yeah.
I'll also I'll edit the README to have it so that you guys can look at because the Git repo will be posted, so I'll also put it there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you, man.
joining. I hope you've enjoyed it.